Have you ever found yourself tangled in a relationship that felt equal parts thrilling and uncertain? Like stepping into a beautiful storm, knowing it might leave you stranded but unable to turn away? That's exactly where I found myself 4 years ago when I met Jennifer. She was magnetic, spontaneous, everything my orderly life lacked. But behind her charm lay questions I couldn't answer and secrets I couldn't ignore. This story isn't just about love or heartbreak. It's about trust, betrayal, and the painful lessons that teach us who we really are. Stick with me as I unravel the moments that changed my life forever. You know, looking back now, I can see how my analytical brain, always calculating, always searching for the most logical answer, was both my strength and my downfall. At 28, as a systems engineer, I pride myself on making sense of the world around me, breaking down problems and finding patterns. But if I'm honest, emotions are a whole other equation. 4 years ago, when I was just 24, my world collided with someone who defied every pattern, every rule I knew. Her name was Jennifer, and she wasn't just another variable in my life. She was the exception. And exceptions, as I'd come to learn, are unpredictable. Jennifer was a whirlwind, the kind that throws logic out the window and leaves you wondering how you ended up in the eye of the storm. Before her, my life had been a series of neatly arranged blocks. Work, gym, family dinners, it all fit. But she was chaos wrapped in charm, and I couldn't help but get pulled in. I remember thinking, what could go wrong? Oh, how naive I was. You see, I've always believed in control, but emotions have a way of undoing even the most calculated of us. It's funny though. Even now, there's a part of me that doesn't regret the journey. Jennifer taught me that life isn't always about the straight path. It's about the detours. She came into my life at a time when I thought I had everything figured out. I was climbing the career ladder, surrounded by like-minded people who shared my logic-first mentality. But she was different. She wasn't a puzzle to solve. She was a question mark that kept me up at night. And those nights, they changed everything. At first, I didn't see it. I was too caught up in her magnetism, too enamored by the way she made me feel alive in ways I didn't even know I was missing. She was bold, fearless, and unapologetically herself. And me, I was hooked. But hindsight has a cruel way of showing you the cracks you missed when you were staring at the glitter. What started as fascination quickly unraveled into something else, something that would test every principle I thought I stood for. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. It happened at a party I didn't even want to attend. You know the type. Loud music, too many people, everyone trying a little too hard. I had planned to make a quick appearance, say hello to a few colleagues, and slip out unnoticed. But then there she was. Jennifer. She didn't blend into the crowd like everyone else. She stood out, like she was meant to be the main event. I wasn't sure if it was the way she carried herself or the way her eyes locked onto mine from across the room, but in that moment I forgot all about my exit plan. She came up to me first, which caught me off guard. I'm not used to people being so direct. "You look like you're calculating your way out of here," she said with a smirk, like she could read my mind. I laughed, more out of surprise than humor, and before I knew it, we were talking like old friends. She was quick-witted, magnetic, and completely unlike anyone I'd met before. There was a spark, undeniable and electric, that made it impossible for me to walk away, and for the first time in years, I didn't overthink it. Before the night was over, Jennifer and I had already made plans to meet again. She had this way of making it seem like her idea was your idea, like you'd be foolish to say no. And honestly, I didn't want to. It didn't matter that we were opposites in almost every way. Her spontaneity was the perfect antidote to my cautious nature, or so I told myself. Something about her made me feel alive, like I'd been running on autopilot until now. But still, there was a nagging voice in the back of my head, whispering questions I wasn't ready to answer. As I left the party, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into something I didn't fully understand. She had this air of mystery, like she was holding back more than she let on. But instead of feeling wary, I felt intrigued. It was as if she had flipped a switch inside me, turning curiosity into obsession. Little did I know that intrigue would soon turn into a rabbit hole I couldn't climb out of. But at that moment, I was all in, and I couldn't wait to see her again. Our first date was nothing like I expected, if I even had expectations to begin with. Jennifer picked the place, a small cafe tucked away in a corner of the city I'd never explored. She arrived late, which didn't bother me as much as it probably should have. When she walked in, it felt like the room shifted. That magnetic charm of hers was disarming, almost enough to distract me from what happened next. Almost. As we ordered, she accidentally called me Andrew. It was just a name, a simple mistake, but it landed like a punch to the gut. My name isn't Andrew, and she didn't even flinch when I corrected her. I brushed it off at first, convincing myself it was nerves or an innocent slip of the tongue. But part of me couldn't shake the sting. Was I just another face in a sea of her admirers? I remember sitting across from her, smiling, nodding, pretending I was fine. Jennifer, for her part, didn't seem to notice my unease. She carried the conversation effortlessly, weaving stories that had me hanging on to every word. She was captivating, no doubt about it. But there was something beneath the surface, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, and it made my stomach churn. Still, I couldn't deny the pull she had on me. By the time the date ended, I had all but forgotten about the name slip. At least, that's what I told myself. She hugged me goodbye, her scent lingering long after she disappeared into the night. I replayed the evening in my head over and over, dissecting every interaction, every glance. I wanted to believe it was a perfect first date, but a nagging voice kept reminding me, "She called you Andrew." It wasn't just the mistake, it was the ease with which she moved past it like it didn't matter. Despite the unease, I couldn't bring myself to walk away. If anything, her mystery made me more determined to understand her. After all, everyone has their flaws, right? Maybe I was overanalyzing, reading too much into a single moment. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Something wasn't adding up, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was missing a piece of the puzzle. I told myself I'd let it go, but the truth was I was already too invested, and that, I would soon learn, was my first mistake. It didn't take long for Jennifer's quirks to turn into question marks. The more we spent time together, the more I realized how much she avoided sharing about herself. She dodged simple questions with ease, her exact age, what she did for a living, even her favorite color. At first, I thought it was part of her charm, this air of mystery that made her so intriguing. But as days turned into weeks, her secrecy started to feel less like a game and more like a wall. The most telling moment came when I asked for her phone number. She laughed it off, saying she preferred keeping things organic. Who doesn't have a phone number in 2024? I tried to rationalize it, convincing myself there was no harm in letting her call me when she wanted to connect. Maybe I was being old-fashioned, or maybe I didn't want to admit that her deflection stung. But the real kicker came when I offered to drop her home after one of our dates. Her expression froze for a split second, before she plastered on a smile and suggested a random street corner instead. "I love walking," she said, waving me off like it was the most normal thing in the world. I drove away, watching her figure disappear in my rearview mirror, unease settling in my chest. The next day, the doubts began to creep in. Was she hiding something, or was I overthinking? I wanted to believe the best in her, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But every interaction seemed to add another layer to the puzzle. Jennifer was like a book with missing pages, and the harder I tried to piece her together, the more questions I uncovered. It wasn't just her avoidance of personal details. It was the way she changed the subject so effortlessly, as if she'd perfected the art of keeping people at arm's length. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Maybe I was scared of the answer, or maybe I didn't want to risk losing her. She had a way of making me feel alive, even when my instincts screamed that something wasn't right. I told myself to let it go, to enjoy what we had, and stop looking for flaws. But the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Deep down, I knew this wasn't the last time her secrecy would haunt me. They say actions speak louder than words, right? That's what I told myself when I decided to surprise Jennifer with a gift, a simple gesture to show her I cared. She had mentioned once in passing that her phone was outdated, so I went out and bought her a new one. Nothing extravagant, just something practical. I remember the look on her face when I handed it to her. Surprise, followed by hesitation. She thanked me, of course, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes I couldn't quite read. Gratitude? Guilt? It vanished before I could pin it down. Days passed, and the phone stayed silent. I'd call, only to be met with voicemail, and every text I sent seemed to vanish into the ether. She'd respond eventually, but never from the phone I'd given her. When I asked about it, she shrugged it off, saying she hadn't had time to set it up. Her excuses sounded plausible enough, but there was something in her tone that made my stomach twist. Was I being too trusting? Or was there something she wasn't telling me? Each unanswered call felt like a tiny betrayal, a reminder that trust is a fragile thing. I started noticing other things too. Little inconsistencies in her stories, moments when her charm felt more like a shield than a window into her world. But every time I tried to bring it up, she had a way of disarming me. She'd laugh, change the subject, or offer just enough of an explanation to keep me from pushing further. And I let her. I wanted to believe in her, in us, so badly that I ignored the growing pile of doubt stacking up in my mind. It's amazing how easily we blind ourselves when we're afraid of the truth. But even as I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Something big. The phone became a symbol, not of my generosity, but of the distance between us. It sat there, unused and untouched, like a reminder of all the questions I didn't have the courage to ask. I didn't know it then, but that gift was the first crack in the foundation I thought we were building. And cracks, as I would soon learn, only grow wider with time. Weeks passed with barely a word from Jennifer. Her absence lingered like a question I didn't want to ask aloud, yet couldn't stop thinking about. Then, one ordinary afternoon, there she was, at my office of all places. I froze the moment I saw her, standing in the lobby like she belonged there, her gaze locked onto mine. She approached me with that same disarming confidence, but her expression held something different this time. Urgency. "Alex," she began, her voice softer than I remembered. "We need to talk." My heart raced, torn between relief at seeing her again and dread over what she might say. She launched into an explanation before I could even ask why she was there. Something about miscommunication, about wanting to reach out but being unsure of how to. It sounded rehearsed, and I couldn't help but wonder if she'd practiced this speech on her way over. I listened, arms crossed, trying to mask the storm of emotions brewing inside me. She apologized for disappearing, for not using the phone, for the evasions I'd pretended not to notice before. Her words sounded genuine, but the timing felt too convenient, like she was trying to regain control of a story slipping from her hands. Jennifer's explanations didn't erase the doubts that had taken root in her absence. I asked her why she was really there, why she'd chosen now to show up unannounced. She hesitated, and that hesitation spoke louder than any excuse she could offer. "I was scared," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of what? Scared of me?" The idea stung, but it also left me more confused than ever. She claimed she wanted to make things right, but her timing and her presence in my workspace felt calculated, almost as if she'd been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Despite my defenses, part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that her fears were real and that her intentions were as sincere as her words. But another part of me, the part that had spent sleepless nights replaying every red flag, couldn't shake the feeling that there was more she wasn't telling me. I agreed to hear her out, but I couldn't ignore the tension between us. It felt like we were playing a game I didn't fully understand, and for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to keep playing. It wasn't easy sitting across from Jennifer as she finally began to open up. There was a fragility in her voice I hadn't heard before, a vulnerability that pulled at something deep inside me. She told me she had lied, more than once. Not because she wanted to hurt me, she claimed, but because she was afraid. "You're so put together, Alex," she said, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I didn't think you'd understand someone like me." Her words stung, not because of the lies themselves, but because of the gap they revealed between who I thought she was and who she really might be. Jennifer admitted she'd felt intimidated by me, by my stability, my certainty. She painted a picture of herself as someone trying to keep up, someone who'd spent years running from her own insecurities. It was a lot to take in. I wanted to believe her, wanted to see the scared, imperfect person she claimed to be. But every detail she revealed felt like a new piece to a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to finish. Was this honesty, or just another layer of the act she'd perfected so well? The line between the two blurred with every word she spoke. The more she talked, the harder it was to stay angry. I could see the cracks in her confidence, the way her hands trembled as she confessed. She spoke about wanting to be better, to prove she was worthy of someone like me. "I know I've made mistakes," she said, tears threatening to spill. "But I need you to know. I care about you, Alex. I really do." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to sweep it all under the rug and start fresh. But another part of me, the logical part, knew it wasn't that simple. Her vulnerability was disarming, but it didn't erase the questions still swirling in my mind. If she cared about me, why had she made it so hard to trust her? Why had she kept me at arm's length when all I wanted was to let her in? I could feel the weight of her words, but also the weight of my own doubts. This wasn't the closure I thought I needed. It was something messier, something unresolved. And yet, for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. There's something about vulnerability that breaks down barriers, even when you don't want it to. That night, Jennifer and I found ourselves sharing a quiet space that felt untouched by all the tension and doubt. Her words from earlier lingered in the air, heavy, but somehow grounding. For the first time in what felt like forever, we weren't tiptoeing around the cracks in our foundation. She reached for my hand, her fingers trembling slightly. And in that moment, it was as if she was letting me see a version of herself she'd kept hidden all along. We talked for hours, the kind of conversation that feels like peeling back layers you didn't know were there. She told me about her fears, her regrets, and the parts of her life she had tried so hard to keep from me. And I listened, not because I fully believed her, but because I wanted to. There was a tenderness in the way she opened up, a rawness that felt both terrifying and comforting. It was hard to reconcile this side of her with the one I'd been so wary of, but I couldn't deny the connection we shared in that moment. Somewhere along the way, words gave way to silence, and silence gave way to something deeper. It wasn't about forgetting the past or ignoring the questions that still lingered. It was about being present, letting ourselves feel without overthinking. For the first time, I allowed myself to stop analyzing every move, every word. She leaned into me, and for a brief moment, all the doubts and fears seemed to melt away. It was fleeting, but it was real. Or at least, it felt real. And that, I realized, was what made it so intoxicating. But as the night faded into early morning, the weight of reality began to creep back in. The connection we'd shared felt genuine, but it didn't erase the scars of the journey that had brought us here. I found myself wondering if moments like these were enough to build a future on, or if they were just temporary escapes from the truth. Jennifer had let me in, but the question that lingered was whether I could truly trust what I'd found there. The line between healing and self-deception had never felt thinner. The morning after our night together, reality hit me harder than I expected. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything Jennifer had said and done. It should have felt like progress, like we'd turned a corner. But instead, I found myself sifting through the same doubts, the same questions. Could I really trust her? Or was I just holding on to a version of her I wanted to believe in? She was still asleep beside me, her face peaceful, almost innocent. And yet, the weight of her secrets hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Later that day, I decided it was time to stop avoiding the inevitable. I needed answers, real ones. When I finally brought it up, The conversation felt like stepping onto a minefield. "Jennifer," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to understand why all the lies, why all the distance." She looked at me, her eyes clouded with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or guilt. "I told you," she began, her tone defensive. "I was scared. I didn't know how to handle this. Us." Her words sounded sincere, but sincerity hadn't exactly been her strong suit before. The more we talked, the clearer it became that trust wasn't something we could rebuild overnight. I tried to explain how her actions had made me feel, how every unanswered question, every red flag, had chipped away at my ability to believe in her. She listened, nodding occasionally, but her responses felt rehearsed, as if she was saying what she thought I wanted to hear. "I'm trying, Alex," she said, her voice cracking just enough to sound genuine. "I don't want to lose you." The vulnerability in her words tugged at me, but it wasn't enough to drown out my doubts. By the end of our conversation, I realized I was still standing at a crossroads. Jennifer's confession had answered some questions, but it had also raised new ones. Could I really move forward without fully trusting her? Or was I setting myself up for more heartache? As I looked at her, tears welling in her eyes, I felt a mix of compassion and frustration. I wanted to believe in her, to believe in us. But deep down, I knew that some questions didn't have easy answers. And that was a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop reflecting on everything Jennifer and I had been through. The highs, the lows, the moments that felt like they could rewrite the rules of my life. All of it was still fresh in my mind. But beneath the whirlwind of emotions, one thing became clear. I couldn't keep living in uncertainty. Trust, I realized, wasn't something I could force. It had to grow naturally, and if it wasn't there, no amount of hope or desire could take its place. Jennifer had made me question everything, but now it was time to answer for myself. I began to see that my obsession with fixing things, with finding solutions to every problem, had blinded me to what was right in front of me. I had ignored the warning signs, choosing instead to believe in potential rather than reality. It wasn't just about Jennifer anymore. It was about me. What did I really want? What did I need to feel secure, to feel valued? These questions weren't just about her. They were about understanding myself. And for the first time, I realized that my stability couldn't hinge on someone else's choices. Jennifer and I talked one last time, and this time, it felt different. There was no anger, no accusations, just a quiet acceptance of where we stood. She admitted she had a lot to work on, and for once, I didn't feel the need to fix her. It wasn't my job. I told her I cared about her, but I needed something she couldn't give. Honesty, without hesitation, trust, without conditions. And as much as it hurt to say goodbye, it also felt like a weight had been lifted. I was choosing myself for the first time in a long time. Walking away wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Jennifer had taught me more than she realized, not just about relationships, but about the importance of listening to my instincts. Love, I learned, isn't just about connection or chemistry. It's about trust, respect, and mutual growth. As I closed the chapter on us, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. This wasn't the ending I had envisioned, but it was the one I needed. And while I didn't have all the answers, I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't settle for anything less than the kind of love that feels like home.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.